What's up everybody, my name is Carl, and today I'm going to talk to you about who the Hat Man is. The Hat Man is regarded as an urban legend, a shadow-like entity linked to sleep paralysis, known as an evil doer. The Hat Man is depicted as a 6 foot tall plus shadow-like entity, in some cases described as a ghost with the shadow of a person. The entity has no distinguishable visible facial features, or any in fact. Although the being has no features, some who have encountered the being have claimed he has glowing red eyes, unlike other shadow people. Most notably, this shadow figure is always wearing a large trench coat or long coat, and most infamously, a brimmed old style hat. Many witnesses report absolute terror upon seeing him. This entity has been known to feed on terror as the victim undergoes sleep paralysis and does not fade away but walks away as a normal person would. Some of the encounters that people have on the Hat Man also states that in some cases the entity has jumped and choked them or has just stood watching them. Wouldn't like the prospect of having to see the Hat Man just standing there in my room, just observing me. Can only imagine how terrifying that must have been for some of these witnesses. Allegedly, the Hat Man is an entity that tends to reside in households or areas where there is a lot of negative emotion taking place. Usually homes that have experienced domestic abuse, fighting, or depressed family members. Some believe the Hat Man is a demonic presence that is sent to bring those who are about to die to hell. A number of religions, legends and belief systems describe the Hat Man and the other shadow beings to be spiritual or supernatural entities. What they can't agree on is whether these figures are good, bad or something else entirely. Most commonly, the Hat Man is heavily associated and cited the most within sleep paralysis. For those of you who are not familiar with sleep paralysis, it is a sleeping disorder that is caused possibly by a disturbed REM sleep cycle. People that experience this are said to be fully awake but unable to move and can witness some pretty psychologically terrifying hallucinations as they are trapped between being asleep and awake. It's supposedly a common occurrence that according to a 2011 US study, it affects almost 8% of people regularly. I guess over 10 years on, this number has increased. Of course, a part of these supposed hallucinations is where people see the infamous Hat Man and other shadow beings. The Hat Man isn't just a sighting in various locations. The entity has become a worldwide phenomenon, with many witnessing the same entity within their sleep paralysis, and some have claimed it to be a part of their everyday life. Even some scientists and experts are unsure as to why people hallucinate or specifically see shadow people, and especially the Hat Man. The Hat Man overall is still a big mystery. Now it's story time, and due to how big this phenomenon is, there is a site dedicated to the Hat Man called thehatmanproject.com, where these stories have come from. So sit back, try to relax, and turn out the lights. Story 1. Hat Man Interrupted. I had no idea until recently that the Hat Man was a phenomenon outside of my own experience. I have never before or since suffered from sleep paralysis, night terrors, or even nightmares. I encountered him only one time. It was mid-March 2006 in Perugia, Italy. My wife and I were on a baby moon, one final trip before the birth of our first child. We stayed on the 3rd or 4th floor of a nice hotel near the historic city centre. After a long day, I slept soundly until I felt like someone was in the room with us and opened my eyes to see a man at the foot of the bed walking towards the balcony. He was about 6 feet tall and wore a suit with a fedora hat. I could easily make out features and he appeared to be in his late 50s. I instantly became enraged and tried to get up as I asked, "Who the fuck are you?" To my surprise, I was unable to move, but he clearly heard me and turned towards me. I am not a man who scares or is intimidated easily, but I will never forget the look on his face and especially his eyes. They were full of rage and hate and blacker than black, like two black holes. As he approached, I felt genuine fear and helplessness. Then I heard a female speak to my left where my wife was laying. She spoke something that sounded akin to Latin. He stopped instantly, as though obeying an order, and his expression then changed to more of an annoyed look. He glared at me for just a second, and then turned and walked out to the balcony. I regained my ability to move and asked my wife what she just said to him, and she said it wasn't her, but was so relieved because she was finally able to move as well. Unbeknownst to me, there was a huge shadow figure that was towering over her and reaching for her until the woman spoke. She didn't see the Hat Man and I didn't see the shadow figure, but we both heard the woman. Whoever she was, whatever she said, stopped him in his tracks. My wife has suffered from night terrors and has had these shadow figures torment her since she was about 10 years old. I suspect that I was just interrupting and wasn't targeted by the Hat Man. He was targeting my wife. Who the disembodied voice came from? I have no idea, but I'm grateful. Story 2. A cloaked silhouette of what appeared to be a man. My experience happened about 8 years prior to submitting this story. I was 20 years old and never had a paranormal experience before or after. The girl I was living with at the time and I were discussing Ouija boards. I had brought up the fact that I'd never played with one. She used to be into witchcraft and black magic and was knowledgeable enough to know that you can make your own Ouija board with the same effectiveness as any other. So we did. Now I don't recall asking any questions that brought us to this point, as I only recall asking standard testing the waters type of questions. Rhonda, the name the entity gave us, was guiding our conversation to where I believe it wanted it to go. Before I knew it, we were being told to go behind and find a rusted gun. We asked if there was any other entities in the house. The entity told us that there was a man. We asked if the entity would talk to the man and ask if he would speak to us. The entity simply told us it was afraid. When we asked why, the entity told us it couldn't talk to us anymore. After about 30 seconds, the temperature began to noticeably drop, and we had a cat at the time that started to freak out for no reason. Usually a timid cat, he started sprinting around us and the Ouija board, but when he got close to the Ouija board, he'd stop and back away. He couldn't go within a foot of it. I asked if Rhonda was still there. I used a pendulum as the conduit between me and any entity that would communicate. And I swear to this day that this is the moment that turned me from a skeptic to a fully fledged believer in the paranormal. The pendulum didn't gently swing as it had been doing before. I felt what seemed like a small electric current course through my arm, and something grabbed my forearm and started to move it to the word no. I immediately dropped the pendulum and destroyed the Ouija board, swearing to never touch one again. At the time I wasn't aware that there is supposed to be some sort of closing ritual or prayer or something along those lines that you're supposed to perform at the end of any Ouija session. Eventually the temperature became normal again, but the strangeness of the air remained. We were in the process of getting a new bed frame and were sleeping on just our mattress that night. I'd just come into bed and laid down. My ex-girlfriend was sound asleep. I remember staring at the black screen of the TV that was turned off when all of a sudden I felt something brush against my feet and the bottom's end of the bed started to shake rapidly. I turned to my ex-girlfriend and asked, "Do you feel that?" She replied tiredly, "Yeah," and just fell back asleep. I rolled from my side onto my back and looked up above my head where the closet was, closed, so I knew what I saw was not my clothes hanging and casting odd shadows. Now when I looked up, I saw what looked like a tall cloaked silhouette of what appeared to be a man, who was almost hitting his head on my 8.5 foot high ceiling, standing at about 7 to 8 feet tall with what appeared to be a tall top hat. I could not make out any clothing and could not see shoes or feet. It was strange, the way it moved. It was almost though it shook the foot of my bed, and by the time I looked up, it made its way around the bed and toward the doorway. And it moved at a pace to where it wasn't slow, but it was obvious this thing wasn't hurrying either, almost like it wanted me to catch a glimpse, or just wasn't too concerned about seeing me at all. Like it knew I had no idea what the heck it was. I still feel uneasy when I tell the story in detail, which this is the first time I have since the incident, besides mentioning it to my current girlfriend. I have to connect the Ouija board experimentation to this. I opened a door that I wasn't meant to open, and I can tell you that I have never had an experience like that before, or since the incident. My ex-girlfriend did some sort of smudging or something along those lines and put some special sort of salt in certain areas of our home, and it seemed to work, or maybe the entity wasn't interested in us, although our relationship became very volatile and eventually deteriorated after this. Maybe its negative energy never went away. Whatever these things are, I don't think we are meant to understand them or their purpose. For some reason, they like to watch us, and every now and then they show themselves, but I believe they are always around us. And that was my take on the Hat Man, a shadow being which has become a widespread phenomenon, entering people's worlds when they're in a vulnerable state, sparking absolute terror into people's minds, but unsure of what its true intentions really are. Is the Hat Man real or fake? In my personal opinion, from the research I've covered and noting that there is a whole website dedicated to this being, as well as various books and documentaries, I am definitely certain to an extent the Hat Man is indeed real. I'm unsure of what the entity's true intentions are, but from what I've researched, I can't imagine it to be anything good. Of course, I'm open to any interpretation and would appreciate what you guys think in the comments down below. So comment down below if you have any more information on the Hat Man. Do you have any true scary encounters that you'd like to share? And what do you think? Is the Hat Man real or fake? Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!